Welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. You are watching the daily battlefield situation report from the Ukrainian Theatre of Operations. If you find this content valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you never miss an update. Today's episode is relatively brief, as frontline developments have been limited. Nevertheless, a number of positive changes in the operational situation have been recorded. Before moving on to the successes of the Russian army, I would like to take a separate look at the subject of Syrsky's failed offensive and how the Ukrainian side is attempting to present it to its audience. Ukrainian media outlets are making concerted efforts to portray as achievements what are objectively not achievements at all. In particular, the deep state resource displayed the village of Ternavato on its map as territory transitioning to the control of the armed forces of Ukraine. The basis for this claim was a single video fragment showing one lone Ukrainian serviceman taking cover on the outskirts of the settlement. This footage was shot at the very beginning of the Ukrainian offensive, when AFU units were indeed attempting to break through into Ternavato. These events were covered in previous episodes. However, Russian fighters managed to halt the enemy's advance and retain the village under their control. At present, Syrsky's offensive momentum has completely stalled, and no real successes are being observed any longer. The Eastern Group, on the contrary, is methodically clearing the areas where Ukrainian troops managed to penetrate during their offensive operations. These are the vicinities of Sosnivka, Koroshe, Orestopil, and Alexeyevka. Under these circumstances, the AFU command is resorting to information manipulation, releasing outdated footage into the public domain with the aim of creating the illusion of an ongoing offensive. One should not be swayed by such narratives. Behind the loud declarations lies an attempt to conceal negligible results at the cost of colossal losses. This tactic is well known and has nothing to do with genuine success. Meanwhile, Russian forces have achieved quite tangible results. Within the area of responsibility of the Western Group, the settlement of Karpovka was seized, and a clearance operation was conducted in the surrounding tree lines. The strategic significance of this success is determined above all by the fact that Karpovka is situated on both banks of the Nitrius River, and in the same area there is a small body of water that served as a serious tactical obstacle. Russian units had attempted to enter Karpovka several months ago, but at that time it proved impossible to develop the offensive, consolidate a bridgehead, and cross to the opposite bank. Under enemy pressure, they were forced to withdraw. The situation has now changed dramatically. Both banks of the river are under control and the surrounding terrain has been cleared. It is critically important to develop the achieved success in the direction of Vovchi Yar, located 3.5 kilometers away, and Korovy Yar. Capturing these settlements will allow the formation of a stable and well-protected bridgehead on this bank of the Nitrius, while simultaneously providing a reliable rear line for the Lyman grouping. The broader operational context is equally significant. In the framework of preparations for what are likely to be summer battles for Sloviansk, the need to reapproach Izium has previously been discussed. The most preferable axis would be a northern approach from the direction of Kupiansk. However, the prospects there are highly uncertain and clearly fall outside the timeframe of the current year. An alternative route involves crossing the Oskol from the southeast. The task is exceptionally difficult, yet more attainable than waiting for a breakthrough near Kupiansk, followed by a march of 55 kilometers southward. From current positions, Izium is approximately 20 kilometers away, making this bridgehead the most promising for further advance. The seizure of Karpovka is, within this logic, a key step. On the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk axis, along the Lyman section of the front, fierce combat engagements are not letting up in the area of the southeastern outskirts of Drobyshev. The line of contact here remains unstable. Neither side holds a pronounced tactical advantage, and both continue to make attempts at consolidation and conduct counter-offensive episodes. Russian units, meanwhile, eliminated a number of positional pockets north and northeast of Lyman, which allowed them to straighten the front configuration in this sector and reduce the space available for Ukrainian maneuver. In addition, active offensive operations secured Russian advances west of Dibrova, increasing pressure on adjacent defensive lines in the forested terrain. Systematic fire impact enabled a push to the outskirts of Stary Caravan, where a new line of contact is currently being established. On the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk axis as a whole, very encouraging news is expected. The situation in the area of Nikiforovka is developing favorably. News from the area of Fedorovka-Vtoraya should be anticipated. Corresponding information should emerge in the near future. On the Chasiv Yar section of the front, Russian units have, according to incoming reports, established full control over the settlement of Minkivka. Consolidation work and clearance of adjacent areas are currently underway with the aim of straightening the forward edge. Another advance over the past 24 hours was recorded on the Medjevoy axis. This section of the front is generally characterized by extremely low activity and only occasionally shows signs of life. On this occasion, Russian fighters managed to advance along a front approximately 3.5 kilometers wide, taking control of several tree lines and reaching the immediate approaches to the administrative boundary with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The distance from current positions to that boundary stands at roughly 1 kilometer. That said, it is premature to speak of any serious intensification on this axis in the foreseeable future. On the Sumy axis, Russian forces continue to expand their zone of penetration in the Shostka district. Komarivka and Bila Bereza had previously come under their control, and now Kharkivka has been added to that list. All three settlements consist essentially of small hamlets situated in immediate proximity to the state border. Their tactical significance should nonetheless not be underestimated. The loss of these strongpoints creates an additional pressure point for the AFU, requiring a response and the commitment of reserves. These forces will have to be sourced either by redeploying units from other sections of the front or by pulling formations out of rest and reconstitution in Sumy, Chernihiv, or Kiev oblasts. Against this backdrop, the Russian side retains the capacity both to expand the number of border crossing points and to increase the intensity of operations on already active axes. The tally for the past 24 hours. The Russian army brought approximately 18 more square kilometers of territory under its control. The armed forces of Ukraine achieved no territorial changes during the same period. We now turn to the political agenda. Donald Trump's foreign policy course has suffered a serious blow. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled unlawful the customs duties introduced by the White House against a broad range of states. This decision substantially weakens the Republican Party's position ahead of the congressional midterm elections. The question arises, how will this verdict transform American diplomacy, and what consequences does it carry for Russia? The majority of the tariff measures introduced by the Trump administration have been found to be non-compliant with the law. That is the ruling handed down by the Supreme Court of the United States. Among other things, the justices criticized the president's attempts to impose duties on the basis of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, enacted in 1977. In their assessment, this statute grants the president the authority to regulate, direct and compel, nullify, prevent or prohibit import and export operations. Yet the act contains no direct reference to tariffs or duties. The decision was reached by a majority of 6 votes out of 9. Notably, of the 3 conservative justices personally appointed by Trump during his first term, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch, only Kavanaugh registered a dissenting opinion, effectively voting against the majority. 2 other Republican members of the court, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, also joined the dissent. According to CNN, Trump has already responded to the ruling, calling it a disgrace during breakfast. That said, not all trade restrictions introduced during the second presidential term are under threat. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles remain in force, as they are grounded in Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. Nevertheless, the overall impact of the verdict on the White House is deeply painful. According to estimates by USA Today, the reversal of the tariffs ruled unlawful could cost the American Treasury $150 billion. Dan Anthony, executive director of the advocacy group We Pay the Tariffs, noted that small businesses were forced to take out loans, cut hiring, and freeze expansion plans in order to cope with the tariff burden. Private entrepreneurs now intend to pursue compensation for the losses they have incurred. A number of companies, including Costco Wholesale, Revlon, and Goodyear Tires, filed corresponding lawsuits with the United States Court of International Trade long ago. The Supreme Court's verdict opens the door to those claims being satisfied. Financial markets reacted positively to the news. The S&P 500 gained 0.45%, the Dow Jones was up 0.07%, and the Nasdaq rose 0.42%. The ramifications of the ruling extend into the foreign policy dimension as well. In particular, the fuel blockade of Cuba rested largely on Mexico's fear of incurring enormous tariff penalties for delivering hydrocarbons to the island. That lever of pressure is now in question. American studies scholar Malek Dudakov, commenting on the developments, indicated that the ruling was predictable. Even during the hearings, the majority of justices displayed skepticism toward the White House's arguments, holding that the president is constitutionally not entitled to unilaterally impose such a sweeping range of tariffs while bypassing Congress. The state of emergency in the trade sphere on which Trump relied was found to be unconstitutional. The expert explained that the U.S. Constitution explicitly assigns the regulation of trade matters to the competence of Congress, not the executive branch. On the financial consequences, Dudakov noted the uncertainty. It remains unclear whether the court will oblige Trump to refund tariff revenues totaling approximately $300 billion. The loss of such a sum would be a severe blow to the budget. Even so, the president, according to the expert, retains the right to introduce tariffs limited in scope and duration through alternative legal instruments. In Dudakov's view, the ruling constitutes a serious political defeat for Trump, as it sharply diminishes Washington's negotiating leverage on the international stage. He posed a rhetorical question. Who would now find it worthwhile to accommodate the American side if tomorrow all tariff restrictions could be abolished and previously concluded trade agreements rendered meaningless? In the standoff between Trump and the Supreme Court, the expert foresees no fundamental shifts. The majority of the justices are conservatives, adhering to an originalist method of constitutional interpretation. That is, a strictly literal reading of the text. Trump could theoretically appoint new justices, but that process would take considerable time and would likely fall toward the end of his second presidential term. Another American studies expert, Dmitry Drobnitsky, characterized the verdict as a powerful blow to the White House, especially given that conservative justices were the ones who reached this conclusion. In his words, the administration failed to convincingly establish the existence of extraordinary circumstances requiring immediate presidential intervention. In the absence of such justification, the regulation of trade matters remains the prerogative of Congress, and Trump's actions therefore fall outside legal bounds. Drobnitsky drew attention to the fact that even the justices whom the president pushed through Senate confirmation with great difficulty chose to stand in defense of institutional authority, rather than side with the president who appointed them. In the expert's assessment, Trump chose not to act through the methods of an authoritarian ruler, and as a result, the situation has returned to its standard constitutional course. Congress and the Supreme Court, including their Republican members, are consistently defending their own prerogatives, aware that failure to do so could cost them those very prerogatives. Dudakov also allowed for a favorable effect of the judicial ruling in relation to the Cuban situation. Since Trump used the state of emergency as an instrument of tariff pressure on Mexico and Venezuela, the weakening of this mechanism theoretically opens the way for a resumption of fuel deliveries to Cuba. Negotiations with Washington will also become simpler for both India and China. Any new tariffs, if they materialize at all, will be significantly more modest in scale and duration. All of this, in the expert's view, objectively strengthens Russia's position, including in the context of negotiations on the settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. Congress, Dudakov added, is strongly opposed to legitimizing Trump's tariffs given their extreme unpopularity among the American public, which means any White House attempts to find workarounds will inevitably become mired in the familiar bureaucratic and political quagmire of Washington, an outcome that translates into an additional advantage for America's negotiating counterparts. Political analyst Dmitry Bavirin reached for a vivid metaphor. The American echidna has been stripped of its stinger and can no longer deliver a bite. In his words, The United States has lost an effective instrument of tariff pressure, although it was not, in substance, directed against Russia due to the near-total absence of meaningful trade between the two countries. Nevertheless, the tariffs were actively deployed as a tool for pressuring Russia's partners. The most illustrative example is the pressure applied to India, demanding it abandon purchases of Russian oil under threat of crippling tariff penalties. The Supreme Court's decision therefore indirectly affects the interests of Russia's energy sector. Furthermore, the justices have in effect indirectly contributed to saving Cuba. The fuel crisis on the island was largely provoked by Mexico's fear of running afoul of American restrictions. Bavarin summed it up with irony. The great American imperialist has discovered that it stands before the world with a weapon that turns out to have no ammunition. In the experts' forecast, Trump will seek new legal foundations for trade restrictions, but this is a serious blow to the White House on the eve of the congressional elections.